Hey guys, I'm Alex from Zaxwerks and welcome to an introduction to ambient occlusion while using 3D ProAnimator. Alright, so what is ambient occlusion and why should you care? Well, the short answer is you should care a lot because it's one of those hidden features that will make your graphics look much better and is drop dead easy to use. Ambient occlusion gives you soft, glowy shadows where objects touch or almost touch. You may have heard them called contact shadows because they appear where objects come in contact with each other. If you've ever looked at the corner of a room and noticed how the light is dimmer in the corners, that's ambient occlusion at work in your everyday life. When you don't use ambient occlusion, your graphics have a very graphic look to them. When you do use ambient occlusion, 3D scenes look much more realistic. I've heard it called the $100 feature because when you turn it on, it looks like you spent a lot more time on the shading and can charge an extra $100 for the effort. Okay, so how do you do it? Here I have some ordinary cubes that have been spread out and randomized a bit. The lighting is all pretty plain and the shading is pretty flat. Not very interesting to look at all. So click on this button down here. This is a lighting workspace button. And then over on our right hand side, we'll find our lighting globals panel. And right here are the settings for ambient occlusion. Click this checkbox to turn it on and then click the render test button to see what we get, and boom. There we go. Huge difference, right? We can see a completely different scene. I'll go ahead and click to get rid of our render and then click render test again, and boom. Every time it's like this whole nother world is revealed to us, right? It looks nice and dark, nice shadows everywhere. Much cooler to look at, right? Okay, we can go ahead, we can turn it off, click render, boring. Click on, hit render, wow, it's nice. Good, so now you know why they call it the $100 effect, right? Oh, $100 button. So what exactly is happening? Well, the computer is checking around each object to see if there are any other objects nearby. If another object is very close, then it makes the shading darker. If the objects aren't very close, then shading is lighter. The distance that the computer checks around each object is controlled by this distance setting right here. The distance that needs to be checked is going to be changed based on the size of your objects. In this scene, each cube is 100 units across. So a distance of 100 would be about as much as a whole cube away from the surface that is getting darkened. That's pretty far. That's very large, right? Larger distances give you softer, smoother shadows. Smaller distances give you tighter shadows. In my example, a distance of 50 works pretty well. Next, we have samples. The sample settings determine how smooth the shading changes are. The more samples you use, the longer the rendering will take. If you are far away, you don't need super smooth shading, so you can reduce the number of samples to speed things up. What I like to do is to turn samples up to see what impact it has on the rendering speed. If you don't notice a difference, then turn it up, leave it high, because it always looks better when it's up higher. However, your scene has lots and lots of polygons, you have a slower machine, whatever it may be, then it might be worth fine-tuning this setting and having a smaller amount of samples to get faster rendering. Alright, so finally, the darkness control determines how dark your shadows will be. The higher the number, the darker the shadows get. The general rule of thumb is to make the shadows dark enough to notice them, then lighten them up a bit by using a smaller number so they aren't so noticeable. This will keep your shadows from looking like an effect and more like a real-world photograph. Alright, so notice we've been using the ray tracer as our renderer. If we switch to the OpenGL renderer, move our camera around a little bit, we can see that we still get ambient occlusion on our objects and it looks good. However, also notice in our ambient occlusion settings over here, the softness control becomes available now. With OpenGL, you get soft. This control adds a little extra smoothing on the shadows. It also allows us to turn down the number of samples, which will speed up our rendering, and we can still get beautiful results. The other cool thing with OpenGL Render is that ambient occlusion is much faster in OpenGL. So if you want to use OpenGL, you can turn on this auto render feature right here, and you can see that we can still move our scene around in real time and we get our nice juicy looking ambient occlusion, right? Okay, cool. So that's pretty much all you need to know about ambient occlusion controls. Now, let's take what we now know and look at a different project to see how you'd work with this in a real life project. Alright, so here we are in our second project, and I have a car and I have a floor. And so right from the get-go, it looks cool. We have a car with some textures, great, but it doesn't look realistic enough. There is nothing holding this car to the floor. What we need is we need realistic shadows, right? And we're going to use ambient occlusion to achieve this effect. So we'll come down here to our lighting workspace, come over to our lighting globals, make sure ambient occlusion is turned on, and zoom in here. Let's just zoom in and take a look real quick. Click on render test, and voila, boom, you'll see those little green boxes go through, and an entirely different scene has been created right before your eyes. Cool, right? So there we go. We have a whole new scene because we have nice looking shadows beneath the tire right here, little darker shadows. And notice how big my ambient distance is right here. That's because our floor is far away from the body of our car, and I want to pick up those shadows over here. And so notice we get a little grainy floor. If we turn up our samples, we will get a smoother floor. There you go, just like that. You get a smoother, not so grainy, but it will take longer to render. So just, note to self. But I'm going to take that back down to 36, and then I'm going to show you if I turn my distance down to something like 100, what I can do is I can keep the nice shadows beneath the tire, but the floor is not going to pick up the body of the car as much anymore. So we still get these nice looking shadows beneath the tires, and it speeds up our rendering a lot. So I can zoom out here, I can take a look at our car, click on render test again, and you can see how cool our scene is starting to look with ambient occlusion turned on. Look at that, right? Okay. Zoom in, even look at these tires right here. Look at the rims. The rims look so much cooler with all this ambient occlusion being applied to them. Voila, there you go. So once again, this is ambient occlusion. Great thing to add to any project. Make your scene look more realistic and awesome. Okay, so that's it for ambient occlusion. If you have any other questions, you can email us or leave a comment below this video. I'm Alex, and I'll see you next time.